So let's talk about the purchase agreement and the COVID forms related to it. So there are several forms related to a purchase agreement, whereas the listing contract has basically one COVID particular form that needs to be filled out on all listing contracts. There's another video to cover that. So today we're going to cover purchase agreements. So one of the first forms that you're going to be involved with in terms of showing property in anticipation of a purchase agreement is the disclosure and waiver prior to physical showing or inspection. So the purpose of this form is to make sure that the buyer and the seller both understand what's going on when they visit a property in person. So let's remember that the governor's order, which runs till May 1st, maybe longer, says that we shouldn't be doing anything except virtual showings unless that you meet certain circumstances. Primarily, it's going to cause a financial hardship on the buyer if they can't be present at the showing. So they have to be there. They have met that requirement, and they say, let's meet there together. Before you meet with your client at a property, they should sign this form. So property address goes here. Please complete the whole property address. Don't just put Jeffersonville, put the street address, the city, and the state. That will help against any kind of confusion in the future about where that property was that you got them to sign this agreement on. So let's talk about it. It says the worldwide coronavirus disease, COVID-19 pandemic, the emergency, with ongoing governmental policy changes is impacting every aspect of the real estate business and transaction. This unforeseen and unanticipated emergency may render performance of contractual obligations difficult or impossible. The parties acknowledge that this emergency is evolving daily. Accordingly, this agreement is subject to any federal, state, or local directives that override or alter applicable law, in which case, to the extent practical, this agreement shall be automatically amended so as to conform with federal, state, and local directives as they become effective. So basically this says that if the directives change, if Governor Holcomb extends the stay-at-home executive order and doesn't want us to do face-to-face showings, then the new date would apply. So any changes made would apply here, even after they've signed the agreement. So the undersigned agrees to the following. So it says that the seller agrees that the property will be made available to be physically shown to a potential buyer and or their agent, or inspected by a home inspector, appraiser, or other third party during this emergency. Collectively, the visiting party. The visiting party means anybody related to the transaction that needs to be inside that property for whatever reason. The visiting party, their guests, invitees, or others entering the property with or on their behalf agree to enter the property at their own risk. So the buyers, the inspectors, the appraisers, those folks understand that they're entering the property at their own risk. That's very important for them to understand that. So, okay, number two, the visiting party agrees to take and ensure that all persons entering the property with them or on their behalf take reasonable precautions to protect the seller, the broker, the broker's agents, and visiting party against exposure to or the possibility of contracting COVID-19 by complying with federal, state, and local directives and guidelines pertaining to the emergency, including but not limited to the President's Coronavirus Guidelines for America and the guidance from the Centers for Disease Control, in addition to other federal, state, and local directives or orders. So we know that if we're going to meet somebody at a property, they should wear a face mask, that you should have hand sanitizer with you, that they should not touch things in the property. One of the things recommended by another agent with another company, which I think is awesome, is they say, please have your clients put their hands in their pockets and not touch anything as they go through the property. Most agents are asking the sellers to open closet doors and things like that, so they don't have to open up anything. They can just look inside. So as long as they take the proper precautions, you're okay. Okay, the third thing here, the undersigned also agrees to immediately inform the broker if the visiting party or person visiting the property with or on visiting property's behalf is diagnosed with or confirmed with a case of COVID-19, or if the visiting party or any other person visiting the property with the visiting party has had direct contact within the past 14 days with an individual with a confirmed case of COVID-19, irrespective of whether that party or that person shows any signs of sickness. So the buyer or anyone else entering that property, you included, by the way, who has been exposed to somebody who has a confirmed case of COVID-19, you must let the listing agent know if you've come into contact with that person within the past 14 days. So any contact you have after the showing, I think you'd be fine, but any contact prior to the showing, 14 days prior to the showing, if you've come into contact with somebody with a confirmed case, you need to report that. Okay, the undersigned agrees to hold the brokerage and their agents harmless from all claims for damages arising out of or relating to this emergency, the condition of the property, entry into the property by visiting party or any persons accompanying a visiting party, or any agent or third party entering the property on visiting party's behalf, or the availability of the property for showing or inspection. Okay, so this needs to be signed by you, the agent representing the visiting party, whether that be the buyer or home inspector, appraiser, whatever. You need to sign it, and they also need to sign it. And you can see there's plenty of room for visiting parties to sign this. I will caution you on this. When you're going to show property, when you have to meet somebody face to face, please ask them to limit the number of people that come to view the property. Only those people who are really the decision makers should be visiting the property. So a person shouldn't show up with their kids and their cousin and their best friend and all that stuff in order to go through the property. However, if they do, everybody needs to sign this document prior to entering the property. So my best course of action has been, when I've had to do it the few times I've had, is to get them to sign it electronically before we even go to the property. I also send a copy of this then to the listing agent so they know I've done my job. Okay, so that's that form. So now you've shown the property and they want to write an offer. So every purchase agreement, this COVID-19 related delay amendment or addendum should accompany every purchase agreement you write. So the date of the agreement, the property in the township, the county, the address, the zip code, and this is the property between the buyer and the seller. So your buyer's name would go in one blank and the seller's name would go in the other. So the following provision supersedes any conflicting language in the purchase agreement. Just like in the one for the listing contract, anything in this form that conflicts with what's already in the purchase agreement, this form takes precedence. So this would be the ruling language if it conflicts with what's in the purchase agreement. If it doesn't conflict with something in the purchase agreement, then whatever's in the purchase agreement still stands. Okay, in the event that complying with the terms of the purchase agreement is not possible or practical because of unforeseen circumstances related to COVID-19, including but not limited to the declaration of a local, state, or national emergency, buyers or sellers' inability to travel to sign documents, buyer or seller being subject to any voluntary or mandatory quarantine, closings of or delays in related government and business services such as inspectors, repair contractors, appraisers, mortgage lenders, title, escrow, county assessors and recorders, or other entities involved in the transaction required to fund, close, or record the real estate transaction. The parties agree to and acknowledge the following. So here's the language. If either the buyer, buyer's lender, seller, or any of their respective service providers or other related agency becomes the subject of a voluntary or mandatory COVID-19 virus quarantine or closure prior to or at the time of the closing, or if the buyer or seller is the party to another transaction that is delayed as a result of a voluntary or mandatory COVID-19 virus quarantine, that results in the party's inability to perform on the closing date on this contract, the closing may be automatically extended by either party for a period of up to 10 days after such quarantine or closure order is lifted, up to a maximum, though, of 30 days, unless the parties agree otherwise in writing to extend that time frame. So understand this. This is automatic. It's not something that they have to agree to later. They're agreeing to it in this amendment for an automatic extension if the closing can't take place on the closing day because of a COVID-19 voluntary or mandatory quarantine. So this gives you some additional time in order to have the closing take place if it can't close on that specific date. Upon the expiration of any automatic or agreed extension related to this COVID-19 delay, either party, that's the buyer or the seller, may terminate this agreement without any further liability to the other party, and the earnest money shall be immediately refunded to the buyer. So if they ask for an extension related to this amendment, that more than 30 days goes by and either party says, I don't want to go any further, then the contract can be canceled by either party, but the earnest money is returned to the buyer without question. Make sure everybody understands that. The parties agree to extend all time frames in the purchase agreement to comply with the COVID-19 related delay if necessary, up to the maximum of 30 days extension provided above. So if the inspection can't be done, they agree to extend it based on this amendment. All other terms and conditions of the original agreement remain in full force and effect. By signature below, the parties acknowledge that they have read, understand, accept, and have received a copy of this signed copy of this addendum. So this is only signed by the buyer and the seller, but both parties should have a copy of this once it's signed. Again, this should be presented when the purchase agreement is presented initially to the listing agent. Then next we have somebody who has done the virtual tour and said, hey, let's write an offer. The offer gets accepted. Along with the purchase agreement, I would have my buyer sign this form, the sight unseen acknowledgement, property address, complete address, the buyer's names. And I'm going to read this to you because the buyer needs to really understand what they're signing when they do sign this. The buyer acknowledges signing the purchase agreement on the above referenced property without having seen the property in person. Except as explicitly allowed under the purchase agreement, the buyer understands that the buyer will not have the ability to reject the property, rescind or terminate the purchase agreement, modify the terms, or request improvements or repairs other than what may be required or negotiated as part of a home inspection. The buyer understands that it is the buyer's responsibility to determine whether the size, location, and condition of the property are acceptable prior to signing the purchase agreement. Seller, listing broker, and buyer make no representations as to the suitability of the property for the buyer's needs. Further, it says the listing and selling brokers and all licensees associated with the brokers are released from any and all liability relating to any issues that could have been discovered by the buyer seeing the property in person. The buyer acknowledges that any images provided by the seller, the listing broker, and the buyer broker electronically or in print may not display the property's features, flaws, or size. Seller, listing broker, and buyer broker are not obligated to provide comprehensive photo, video survey of the property. Any photos provided are at the broker's discretion and may not be an accurate depiction of the current appearance or condition of the property. So basically this says that the buyer understands if they write an offer and it's accepted, they must move forward with the purchase unless something comes up in the inspection or they're rejected for the loan. But they can't later say, well, I didn't go in person, so I don't like it, and I'm not going to buy it because of that. Again, this is just signed by the buyers. I would get this signed at the time they sign the purchase agreement if it applies. So let's say that you have a buyer who says, I'm not going to sign that, I'm not going to buy it until I've actually been in the property. And I certainly understand somebody having that feeling. So this is just a suggestion, it's not a requirement. But on page 7 of the purchase agreement under further conditions, you might write something like this. This offer is accepted, if accepted, is contingent upon the buyer's in-person review and acceptance of the property within 2 days of the offer acceptance. This contingency does not affect the buyer's right to inspections per section N, item 2 of this purchase agreement. So basically this says, yes, if you accept my offer, I need 2 days or however many days you think are necessary to go see the property in person. And then if I see it in person and I decide I don't like it, then I can remove myself from this purchase agreement. It also says, though, if I do accept it, that my rights for inspections are not affected by the fact that I'm going to review the property before I move forward. You don't have to use that. It's something that I think I'm going to begin to use myself, because some people do have a little reluctance to sign the sight unseen addendum. I understand that. That's it. If you have any questions, as always, you can call me anytime or call Craig. He's also happy to help. And I hope this was of some good use to you.